I'm the president of the Autism Legal Resource Center, Dan Unum, and we have with us today Monica Palma, who is going to talk to us about criminal law and autism. We're really thrilled to have Monica with us. Monica is a third-year law student at St. Mary's Law School in Texas, soon to get her JD and join the very special ranks of board-certified behavior analysts who are also attorneys. So we're excited about that. Monica also, after she graduates, will be working at San Antonio Legal Services Association, or SALSA, and she is going to be on an Equal Justice Works fellowship. Equal Justice Works is a very prestigious fellowship for people who are interested in working in the area of public interest law. So that is quite a feather in her cap, and we're excited for her to get that. Monica has done a lot of work for us in her internship over the last several months in compiling resources and giving us analysis of criminal law issues as they pertain to autism, and has been very helpful to us in the past, and other things, working together with us and putting on our annual attorney summit meeting, etc. So thank you so much, Monica, for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you and mute myself. And
all right, thank you. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. So thank you for those of you who are attending live today, and those of you who will be watching this recording. My goal today is just to walk you through the resources that we put together on the National Autism Law Center website. So I'll be sharing my screen here momentarily, but those of you who are attending, I would really love it if you could jump in with any questions, comments. I know we have some attendees with related backgrounds today, so I would just love to hear from you and love this to be more of a conversation than me just talking at you. So please feel free to unmute yourselves, ask questions, put questions in the chat as we move through. So as Dan mentioned, I am also BCBA, and I went to law school to specifically work in this area to help families with special needs. So that's what I'll be doing in my fellowship starting in September. So this area of criminal law is something that we felt like there was a need for, and there is a little bit of a gap with some of the information that's out there specifically related to individuals with autism and the criminal justice system. So we put together some resources to that end, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can show you. All right, so I'm hoping everyone can see my screen. So this is just the landing page for the National Autism Law Center. So the way you're going to navigate to the resources we put together is just come to this resources tab here, scroll all the way down to criminal law resources, and just give that a click. So once we're here, you see we have the information categorized for different audiences. So we're going to go through all of that today. I'm just going to walk you through kind of some of the features and some of the important information that I found in my research and kind of what that means for the population. But you'll see the different audiences we have here for attorneys, for self-advocates, for parents or guardians of individuals on the spectrum, and then for providers. So I'm just going to start here at the top and kind of walk you through. So if you click on the attorney page here, you're going to get to this landing page. And what we really tried to do here is put together resources for attorneys who are interested in potentially representing individuals on the autism spectrum in any sort of litigation. And so this information kind of gives anyone who's trying to discern, is this appropriate for me? Do I have the skill set? Do I have the background to be able to take on this client and to serve them well? And so this would be a good page for someone to come to who maybe has limited experience or no experience in serving our population, to just get a better idea. Okay, what do I need to know? What things need to be on my radar? How can I best serve this family and this client so that they're having the best outcomes? And so the big underlying piece of this, a thread that we really want attorneys to take away who are considering working with clients on the autism spectrum, is that there really has to be that knowledge or the desire to gain the knowledge on what is ASD, because ASD is going to impact every aspect of a case that they're taking. So it's very important to understand that. One of the experts that I got to talk to and work with in putting these resources together is Mark Mahoney. And so one of the pieces of advice or cautions that he had is an attorney who wants to work with someone who's facing charges potentially in the criminal justice system who is on the autism spectrum really has to be aware that the ASD is going to be a driving force between how they're approaching the case. So it's not just going to impact how they interact with the client. You know, it's not just going to impact how they're asking questions or how they're doing interviews or how they're collecting information. It's going to impact everything from their approach to how they educate people on the other side to how they arm their defense. It really needs to be the thread going through everything. And so an attorney who kind of wants to look at autism as a side piece or as an afterthought is going to have a very difficult time representing effectively an individual on the autism spectrum. So that's really the piece that we want attorneys to take away from this page, is if you're considering representing someone in a criminal justice matter that is on the autism spectrum, you really need to understand that that diagnosis is intertwined with every aspect of the case and with that individual. And so you have to be willing to look at it through that lens. And so to that end, we gathered some resources here. These are some top resources. As I indicated, Mark Mahoney was very instrumental with this particular page in helping us kind of cherry pick which of these resources would be most beneficial to attorneys. And so just starting here in the top left, we've got the Handbook of Autism Spectrum Disorder and the Law. So you'll notice if you're in this space, a lot of familiar names in this textbook. So this is definitely a very good resource for anyone who's looking at representing someone with autism in this area. So this link will take you to a table of contents for the text and kind of let you know what is included in there, and then the attorney can decide if that is a good fit for them. As I already mentioned a few times, Attorney Mark Mahoney, he is the leading criminal defense attorney for individuals with autism spectrum disorder. He's been doing it for more than 15 years. He has a couple of great articles here on representing those clients. A lot of his work is based around representing individuals with autism spectrum disorders who are facing potentially child pornography charges. And so he has quite a bit of information on that. And in his work with that, he's been able to also look at what are the variables with autism that are impacting these particular charges and how do we approach that. Over here, this is an excellent podcast, so I definitely encourage you to check this out. You can, have it in the background and kind of get an idea, but this is a series. So there's 2 different podcasts in terms of understanding how autism comes in at sentencing. So you'll remember I mentioned it should be something that is being brought from the beginning of the case, from the beginning when you get a client, but Doug Passon here really explores how this ties into sentencing. And so they do a really good job. Mark Mahoney is a guest on one of these podcasts of walking through exactly how autism plays a factor into sentencing and how attorneys can really approach that. So this is an excellent resource that I recommend that you check out. This is a text here as well. It's book Mind Blindness. And so this is Autism and the Theory of Mind. And so this is something that attorney Mark Mahoney uses a lot when he's working with individuals on the spectrum, especially to help explain to prosecutors exactly how an individual with autism might be thinking about things a little bit differently, what their approach is, what their perspective is. And so he really recommended this book quite a bit in terms of just gaining perspective and also helping others who maybe don't have a child on the autism spectrum, don't have a direct connection to the community, really pull out the pieces and help them understand, okay, this is why you're seeing this, or this is why the person is approaching it that way. And then my absolute favorite resource that I found in my research, just looking at criminal law and autism, the ARC has a program called Pathways to Justice, and this resource is just chock full of information about the criminal justice system. So they don't just specialize in autism, they're IDD. And so they have all different areas, but they have webinars, they have case synopses on there, they have resources to other areas, but it is an extremely robust library of information. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at that ARC Pathways to Justice, because you could really dig in there for the information that you're looking for. If you have a particular client, if you have a family you're working with, if you have a kiddo or a client that you're looking to take on to represent them in a matter, this could kind of give you a good jumping off point to say, okay, do I have the knowledge, do I have the resource library where I would feel confident representing this individual? So something else that comes up a lot for our individuals on the autism spectrum is decision making. So there, of course, I'm sure you've heard of guardianship, but that's going to be very restrictive, and it's not going to be appropriate for all of our clients. It is a process to get guardianship. You have to go through the probate court, you have to prove incapacity. There's all sorts of hoops that you need to jump through. So this isn't typically appropriate for individuals on the autism spectrum who are higher functioning, who have the ability to make those decisions. The court's going to be reluctant to take away all of those rights, or even a majority of those rights, for them to be able to decide, you know, how to about marriage, about voting, about where to live, about how to spend their money. So there's another option that I've come across. I know it's an option here in Texas that's called a supported decision-making agreement. So it's SDMA for short. So we have some information here. There's only 14 states right now that currently recognize supported decision-making agreements. But if you happen to be in one of those states, I highly encourage you to take a look at this. This is a form that can be filled out with or without an attorney. I encourage you to have an attorney look over it with you, just to make sure that capacity is being checked as the individual signs it. But what this really does is an individual fills out the supported decision-making agreement and says, I still want to make my decisions. I have the wherewithal to make my choices, but I need some help. And so what this really does is kind of solidify or make more concrete or more official the way that most of us make decisions. So when any of us, you know, want to make a decision, typically we have someone we call, you know, if we're going to buy a house or get into a car loan or just making an important financial or life decision, typically we're going to consult someone, whether that's our spouse or our parent or brother, sister, you know, your friend, whoever that is. And so what this does is really make that more official for our individuals with a disability who want to have that in writing and want to have more help, so that they can show that to someone. This really helps take any questions away when they're meeting with a doctor, when they're meeting with a bank loan officer, when they're meeting with someone, that like, yes, I want this person to be here. Yes, I want them to help me make decisions. They're not here against my will. They're not making me include them in this decision, especially for our individuals who maybe have social challenges and are going to have a more difficult time expressing that in the moment when they're being faced with those decisions. This is going to really help them say, you know, here's my SDMA. You know, I'd like my mom in here. I'd like my sister in here. I'd like my advocate in here with me as I make this decision. And so, as I indicated, this doesn't allow the other person that is being put on there as their supported decision maker to make any decisions for them. So this is very different than a power of attorney or medical power of attorney, where that person is entitled to make those decisions. This is just, I am allowing them to be present and to hear the information, and then they will assist me to the point that I would like them to help me make that decision. So there's some information and some links here. The American Bar Association has a practical tool that can be found here at this link. And what it does is it walks through, like I said, those different guardianship and alternatives to guardianship. So this SDMA would fall under the alternatives to guardianship umbrella. And you can find some more information there. And since this is the attorney page, we have the statutes linked, since each one of these 14 states are going to recognize kind of the coverage and the extent of the SDMA a little bit differently. So it's important that you check out the statutes so that you know what your particular state recognizes and doesn't recognize in terms of that SDMA. But we have that here because in these states, that could be a very useful tool for the attorney to help their client complete. Also for them to have better protection with having other people involved in the case, to have that extra individual present. They're like, this is covered by the SDMA. They want this person here. This is something they've signed off on. So another area that is of interest to our attorney population is going to be the mental health courts program. So this is something that, again, is going to be run differently state by state. You'll hear that a lot. And those of you familiar in this area, of course, know that that's kind of the way that things are done, and that we have to deal with the enforcement being different in every state. But the mental health courts program, is federal, it's public law. And so this is the act that covers it. And the program is funded by the Bureau of Justice under the U.S. Department of Justice. And so that funding does come from the federal level, but now it's up to every state and then every county how they're using those funds, how they're running the mental health courts, and what the criteria are. So this is where it becomes really important for you to check your state, to check your county, and to figure out what's being covered in each of those mental health courts. So typically for the mental health courts, they are going to cover non-violent individuals who have any sort of mental health diagnosis or substance use disorder. But again, it varies by court. So some courts will say explicitly, we will take individuals on the autism spectrum. Other people will say we will not take individuals on the autism spectrum. Some may have specific criteria for how to qualify. Others are going to leave it more open. So there are currently 300 mental health courts in the United States. And there's an interactive tool here that I'm going to show you that is very useful if you're looking at locating one of these. So this is from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And you'll notice this is familiar to the Autism Legal Resource Center, how they have their map set up for the different autism insurance mandate information. They have that on this page as well. So if you scroll up here, you can click on adult mental health courts and it's going to take you to this map. And so say I'm in Texas, I can click on Texas here and then scroll down, and it's going to start showing me every mental health court that's available in Texas, and it's going to walk me through a contact. You'll notice on some of them, they have target participants. So like I mentioned, nonviolent misdemeanors is going to be a category here. Some of them have caps on enrollment. They only take 65 here in Harris County per year. And so those are going to be very important things to note if an attorney is considering taking on a criminal case for an individual on the autism spectrum, because this may be an avenue that they want to pursue. They may want to pursue having the case moved to a mental health court if that's something that is available in the area that they are in. Because often the idea with these mental health courts is that they are providing wraparound services. So they're not just saying, okay, we're going to try this case, we're going to give out the sentence, we're going to move on. Their goal is really to try to stabilize the client and improve that client's life. So they're typically tied in with a lot of the key agencies and providers in the area. They're looking at, is this person homeless? How do we get them housing? Is this person need medication and they can't afford it? How do we get that medication covered? So this looks a lot more like a team approach, wraparound services, like those of you familiar with the school system, kind of like an ARD meeting, putting a group of people together to work towards that end. That doesn't mean the client isn't going to be prosecuted or have a sentence or be held accountable, but it does mean that they're also going to get those additional supports that they potentially need, and that were probably contributing factors in landing them in this situation. So mental health courts, again, they're going to vary state by state, county by county, and the quality of the services provided are going to vary, but it's definitely something worth looking into as an attorney considering taking a case, or as an attorney who has taken a case. If that's an option, that may be something that an attorney wants to consider, is trying to have that case moved into the mental health court, especially if it's a client with limited resources or with a limited support system, because they're going to be able to hopefully help fill in some of those gaps. On that same website that we were, they also have it separated by juvenile mental health treatment court locators. So you can also come here and you can look at if there are juvenile mental health courts available in your area. So you can see, like for South Carolina, there are no results, so there's no juvenile mental health courts there. If we click on a different area, so there's going to be less for the juvenile mental health treatment courts. But this would be your first resource to looking at, okay, is this even an option? Is this available in my area? As we talked about, the ARC Pathways to Justice has a lot of resources. They have a webinar here just on mental health courts, how they work. We'll do a much deeper dive than I just did on what's covered and what's not covered in that system, and some experts will walk you through. So I highly recommend checking out this webinar if this is an area of interest to you. And then there also is a link here on if you are interested in developing a mental health court in your area. So you saw some of those states, that don't have a juvenile mental health court. So if that's something that you feel passionate about and want to take on, this organization, I'll show you briefly here, has put together a number of learning modules, the Justice Center here, and these are free. These are accessible to the public on how to develop a mental health court and how to do it well. So that's something I definitely encourage if this is an area of interest for you. If you're passionate about getting this in your area, please check that out and contact this organization, because they are passionate about getting that information out as well. All right, so I'm going to take you back now that we've gone through the attorney page, and we're going to go back to our criminal law resources page and look at our self-advocate page here. So this is information about how an individual, important things that an individual on the spectrum should know about their rights, about how to interact with law enforcement, about their options in getting representation and getting help. And so really what we're looking for here is just to disseminate this information. And so if you know individuals that need this information, please send it to them. If you know of organizations who are supporting individuals on the autism spectrum, please share this information, because a lot of what I saw in my research and what I saw reading through cases and reading through these interactions that our population has with law enforcement is education goes a long way to avoid a lot of these situations and to protect our individuals. As a BCBA, as someone who has done a lot of direct service with adolescents and adults, this is definitely a passion area for me, because if we can get that information out, if we can front end that workload, if we can help them avoid getting themselves into these sticky situations, that is really where we're going to be able to start making a difference. Like the rest of it is great. If we can have quality representation, if we can help them get those resources, that's fantastic. But if we can avoid the problem in the first place, that's really, as a provider for me, what I would envision as the best case scenario. So this is kind of a short list of where an individual on the autism spectrum could get help if they do find themselves faced with criminal charges. They could always hire a private defense attorney if that's something that their financial situation allows. They could use a public defender if they cannot provide that for themselves. These P&A agencies, I put a note here, not all P&As accept criminal cases. So this is again going to be a state by state check-in to see if your P&A agency does provide criminal representation, because some of them do only do civil matters. So that's going to be another avenue. The ARC, I've mentioned them a few times, they do have that Pathways to Justice program. One of the branches or the pieces of that program is legal representation. So that is another potential avenue that someone could reach out to and say, I'm in the situation, I need help. And they could call those different organizations or providers to try to get help. All right, so as an individual with autism spectrum disorder, you are protected against discrimination. Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act affects public programs and activities. This includes law enforcement, jails, courts, and this is both at the state and federal level. So this includes things like effective communication, the right to access programs and services. So this looks like having you be able to access not just the physical environment, but what's being spoken, what's being said, in a way that you can access it and understand it. So the ARC has another webinar in this particular area on your rights as a person with a disability. So I definitely encourage you to watch that. I also encourage any providers, attorneys, anyone in this area to watch that so that you're better versed in how to educate your children, clients, potential clients on what their rights are within the system. So for me, this is probably the most important. I've read through so many cases and so many sad interactions where that initial interaction with law enforcement has gone terribly wrong. Where things could have been changed and where there's this long drawn out process because a person with a disability, a person on the autism spectrum didn't know what their rights were. And as we discussed, if you're in this field, our population tends to have more difficulty with social situations, with reading social cues, with pragmatics of language. And so this is an area that comes up as a challenge. So the first thing that someone on the autism spectrum needs to decide is whether they want to disclose their diagnosis to law enforcement. It is up to them. Again, this is their choice. If they want to disclose that, then they can. I know there are some states now that are allowing you, I think less than half at this point, to put a designation on your driver's license. To have a communication disorder, which one of the things under there for most of the states is autism spectrum disorder. So that would be a way, but I know there's been a lot of concern with that, both from parents and individuals with, is this going to make the officer more nervous to interact with me? Is this going to make me a target? So there's all those things to consider. So in my research, I did read through some articles and firsthand experiences. And for me, I would definitely recommend erring on the side of disclosure. It's going to be up to that individual, but we've seen more positive results when the information is disclosed than when it is not. And so again, this is where an individual should discuss the pros and cons of disclosure with their support system and then make that plan accordingly. So one of the things we recommend here is if the person does want to disclose is the use of a handout card. So this could be a small laminated, like a business card size card that the individual carries in their car, carries in their wallet, has, a couple copies of that are laminated that they can give away to someone who they need to interact with. Again, in a stressful situation, our individuals on the autism spectrum, not only is that going to impact their social interaction, but there's also a lot of comorbidities with anxiety, with other things that are going to come up. And so if we could use a tool, if we could give them something to make this just a little bit easier, that's something I'd highly recommend, so that that individual has the opportunity to say, I have autism, I have a card I'd like to give you, and then the officer is going to get a lot more information from there on how to interact, what the deficits are, how they should proceed, than an individual who's kind of caught, deer in headlights in a situation that they don't know what to do. They're potentially in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, and trying to just figure out, okay, how do I handle this? What do I do next? So we put this in a little graphic here with the steps. So step one, we recommend is verbally letting the officer know that you have autism. Step two is letting them know that you have an information card you want to share with them. And step three, the most important, is asking for permission to hand them that card, or reminding individuals not to make any sudden movements. Reach for that card before the officer gives you permission to do so. Very, very important to educate individuals in the general population, but specifically for our individuals, that is a vital step in this process. Do your best to stay calm and listen to the directions of the officer. Do not run. So this is something I saw kind of in reviewing case summary after case summary, is that led to a lot of issues because the officer then assumes, okay, there's something awry here, there's something wrong, even if that's just, I'm stressed, I'm scared. So my initial gut response is to run. And I can't read the social situation, do something differently. And then just the best way to be prepared for a scenario is to practice with a trusted friend or support person so that you know the steps ahead of time. As a BCBA, I recommend behavior skills training here, walking through, teaching, modeling, doing practice, giving feedback, and then repeating that until mastery. Because for a lot of our individuals on the autism spectrum, regardless of functioning level, it's going to be just that repetition, that being comfortable, being prepared. And this applies to really anyone. This isn't just for individuals on the autism spectrum or disabilities. The more comfortable we are with the situation, the more we know what to expect, the better we're going to react when that actually happens. All right, so this section is what to do if police or law enforcement want to interrogate you. And so this is really important because when it comes to custodial interrogation, this is when things are going to be able to be used against that individual in any court proceedings after this. So custodial interrogation occurs when a reasonable person feels like they're not free to leave. Contrary, I guess, to what some people may think, an officer does not need to let you know that they're interrogating you. They do. It's really about, am I free to leave? So if you ask, so the easiest way to do that is ask, am I free to leave? If the officer says no, and they're proceeding to question you, they should read you your Miranda rights. Again, there's no magic words for this, but they do need to include something, like is listed here. So your right to remain silent, that anything can be used against you. You have a right to an attorney. If you can't afford one, it'll be provided for you. And then they have to ask if you understand those rights. There's a good visual here for the Miranda warnings, that you're familiar with them and you know what they are. And so one of the things here that I think is important, I guess, for the general public to know is that you have to affirmatively waive your right. So this is where things get a little bit tricky. So you don't have to say, okay, I waive my rights. If you just continue, talking to the officer after they've read you your Miranda rights, that is, you're waiving your rights. And so you really need to be careful in the situation. We need to train our individuals, whether it's family, friends, clients, potential clients, on the best course of action here is to affirmatively invoke your rights. So to say, you have to say, I am invoking my right to remain silent. If you just stay silent, so this is what a lot of people don't know, if you just stay silent, you have not affirmatively invoked your Miranda rights. An officer can keep questioning and questioning and questioning that person. And this is going to be really important for an individual on the autism spectrum. They're going to take things very literally. Hey, you just told me I have the right to remain silent. I'm sitting here silent. Why is this officer continuing to berate me, to ask me questions, to try to get me to answer? And after a while, they may get worn down and start, answering or get flustered or say things they shouldn't have said. So it's really important for individuals to understand they do have to affirmatively claim that right. So they have to say, I am invoking my right to remain silent. I don't want to talk to you. Same thing with that attorney. So you need to invoke that right. What a lot of people don't know is the officers who are interrogating someone, even if, let's say this is an adult, right? And they were picked up and they've been read their Miranda rights and officers interrogating them, and mom or dad saw them, get arrested and brought down to the station, and they call their family attorney and say, attorney, please go down to the station. My son's been picked up. Yeah, I need you to go down there and help him. The attorney shows up to the station and lets them know, hey, I'm here to see my client. The officers are under no obligation to let that client know that there's an attorney there who wants to represent him or who wants to talk to him. It is up to the client, the person who's in the interrogation, to invoke his or her right to that attorney. So there is a lot, I feel like, of area here, gray area, especially for our individuals on the autism spectrum, to be lost in, because again, the thinking may be, okay, someone's coming for me, they're going to let me know when they're here. The officers do not need to do that. You have to invoke your right to an attorney, and we recommend they do that immediately. So, attorney, I want an attorney. Because after that, the interrogation stops. So if you've said, I invoke my right to remain silent, I invoke my right, I need an attorney, I want my attorney. At that point, the officers have to stop questioning. When it is in terms of invoking your right to remain silent, they can come back after a reasonable period has expired and try again. But that's the process. At the point that you invoke either your right to remain silent or your right to an attorney, that interrogation needs to stop. Because at that point, you need to have legal counsel present for any further questioning if you've invoked an attorney. So you should never speak to law enforcement without an attorney present. So this is just a general piece for everyone in the population, but this is so important for individuals with autism, because they're going to get caught up in, the officer saying, well, don't you just want to talk to me? It's going to be a lot easier for you if you just let me know now, and just teaching them, hey, let's teach that rule governed behavior to benefit them. You never speak to a law enforcement, person if they're questioning you without an attorney present. If you are being, if you've been read your Miranda rights, like your immediate response, so the SD is Miranda rights, the response is going to be attorney, I need my attorney. So this is going to be really, really important. Another thing, this is for those not in the legal system, is just, and to educate our families and our individuals on the spectrum. It may surprise you to learn officers, they can lie during an interrogation. Those tactics are perfectly legal. There's one of the cases that we covered in law school where during an interrogation, this was, for a bank robbery, the officers told the individual, we have you on camera, and the individual responded, well, I have a ski mask on, so you're not gonna be able to know that's me. And the officers told him, well, we have this new technology where the computer can peel off your mask and so we'll see your face. And the person was like, okay, you got me. And so obviously that's not true. There's been all sorts of tales that officers use, and those tactics are perfectly acceptable. There's no bar against that, as long as there's no threat. An officer cannot make a threat, like, I am going to hurt your family if you don't tell me this. That is not allowed. That's not part of interrogation, but they can lie. They can use those tactics to deceive, and that's perfectly acceptable. And anything that individual says can be used against them. So it's really important that we educate our families and our individuals on the spectrum that, hey, these are tactics that can be used, and you need to be really wary of talking to officers. So try again, the best protection is for them to invoke that right to an attorney as early as possible. Again, we included information here about supported decision-making agreements, so that if an individual feels like they want that extra layer of protection, they can have that there as well. All right, so moving on to our page on parents and guardians. So this is probably the population who needs to access this the most. Usually parents and guardians don't even know where to start if their child, whether it's a adolescent or an adult child, has been charged in the criminal justice system. That's scary for any parent. And then layering on top of that my child has a disability and I don't know how to help them effectively in this particular system. So what we tried to do here is put together some easily accessible resources that families could use as a first step on where do I go, what do I do, where do I start? And so the first piece with that is finding competent representation, finding a criminal defense attorney. So just like with anything, you need to do your research and ask questions. And working with parents for 12 years in this space, I mean, these parents of special needs individuals are some of the most knowledgeable individuals, and they're going to find out that information and they're going to get it done. Just a group of doers. And so this is something that skill set is going to be very well tailored to in terms of doing your research and asking questions, because many parents have already had to do that their entire lives with the school system, with medical providers, with all of the different areas. So this area is really no different. You are the expert as the parent. What I've always said as a BCBA, you are the expert on your child. You know them better than anyone else does. And so you're the best person to advocate for them. That doesn't change in this context just because it's an attorney. And so you're still going to need to vet and advocate and put that information out there. So unfortunately, this is one of those spaces that there are very few attorneys who specialize in criminal defense of individuals on the autism spectrum. But we do have a short list here. This links to I'm going to show you this real quick. This links to the Autism Legal Resource Center page, and it brings you up with the short list of all of the criminal defense attorneys that we have in our database. And so what I will ask is, if you're watching this video and you know of an attorney who is not on this list, who you've worked with, or know who is working in the space, is to please reach out and let us know so that we can add them to this database, because the more robust we can make this database, the more options families are going to have, because you'll notice some of those, there's a lot of geographic areas that are not covered by that short list of attorneys in this space. So what most families are going to be faced with is that they're going to have to interview potential attorneys who maybe have no experience working with individuals on the autism spectrum. They might be a phenomenal criminal defense attorney, but they've never worked with someone on the autism spectrum. And so that's where it's going to be very important for you to ask those questions up front. So just like when you're hiring any sort of provider for any need, you get to ask the questions, just like if you are interviewing a pediatrician or a specialist or someone to work with your child. It's okay to ask them the hard questions. The attorney status doesn't change that. So if you can't find an expert that's geographic in your area, where you might want to start is your local state bar page. So every state has a state bar website, and they all have a searchable database there. And typically you can filter down by category. So you should be able to select criminal defense, and then they will be able to show you the list of individuals in your area. So that might be where you need to start. Find some people, look at the websites, good candidates who you might be comfortable with, and then you want to set up an initial interview to ask them the questions. Let them know, okay, here's a situation with my loved one. Here are the questions I have for you. One, do you know autism? Have you ever worked with an individual with autism? If you haven't, are you prepared to educate yourself, or prepared for me to get you experts to teach you on what this means? One of the tips and questions that Mark Mahoney really wanted us to stress is getting an attorney that charges by the hour. Not hiring an attorney that has a big retainer, because he's seen a lot of families get themselves into trouble where they're getting a second mortgage on their house to pay this retainer for this attorney, and they're getting into the process, a few months, and then figuring out this attorney really doesn't know how to represent my child effectively with his autism or her autism spectrum diagnosis. And so really to be wary of that situation, and to try to stick with attorneys who are going to charge you by the hour. Number 3 is really important. Will you honor my involvement? We talked about, you are probably the person who knows your child best. Now, this is where it can get a little tricky if you have an adult child who you don't have a guardianship for, because there is attorney-client privilege, and that attorney does not need to let you be involved with the case, even if you're the one paying for it. So this is part of our ethics code on the attorney side, is that attorney-client privilege is paramount, and it doesn't matter who's paying for those services. That does not give them the right to get the information or to be involved or to pierce that attorney-client privilege. So it's going to be an important thing to keep in mind. So this is where supported decision-making agreement is going to come in handy, or making sure that your adult child knows, I'd like to be involved. Can you please, have me involved and bring me into the meetings and ask that the attorney allow me to be involved. Number 4, are you willing to seek out help? So again, is this attorney someone who's going to look at experts in the field, at educating themselves and at learning, or they just want to do it the way they know how to do it? And then number 5, are you able to put the pieces together? So do you understand neurodivergency? Do you understand, my child may be very high functioning, they may be in college, they may be successful with the accommodations we put in place, but do you understand the difference and the gap between intelligence and adaptive functioning? Do you think it's morally wrong to prosecute my child? Again, that's going to go a long way for a parent, feeling confident in an attorney that they're selecting. If the attorney says, it doesn't matter what I think or not, again, that's something you have to gauge if you're comfortable with. So these are all just questions, none of the answers to these questions have to make or break your decision to hire or not hire an attorney, but they're definitely useful things to ask and to keep in mind as you're trying to decipher, is this the best attorney for our family in this particular case? So I already talked a bit about attorney-client privilege. We've talked about the supported decision-making agreements, and that those could be a useful tool in these situations, because if that's something you had already previously executed and that your child is now just giving to the attorney is going to feel very confident that yes, they do want you involved in their decisions, and with their permission is going to include you in that process. So very, very important here. Again, we talked about you are the expert on your child. Whether you're the parent, adoptive parent, grandparent, guardian, whoever you are in your child's life, preparing a narrative of your child's developmental history chronologically through the present is going to be key. That attorney, if they could get a timeline, if they could get that overview of your child, of especially any longstanding deficits, anything that's pervasive, they'd want to know that. And so you want to gather your school medical related service records that help to bolster that history, because that's going to be crucial as they're putting their case together and figuring out the best approach, because they're going to have all of that information up front to know, how do I move forward? What is my best path to follow in this case? So there's more information here on disability rights in the legal system. So this is especially useful for individuals who may already be in the criminal justice system. So if a parent is trying to find, okay, my child is in jail already, what rights do they have? What recourses do I have? This is a great resource to find some of that information. All right. And we have just enough time left to go to our providers page. And this, of course, is an area that I'm very passionate about as a provider, as someone who's still a BCBA and moving into this space. For me, this is an area, if we can mobilize this population of individuals, whether they're BCBAs, speech therapists, OTs, group home, support staff, whoever it is, education, health, school, different support services, those individuals spend a lot of time with our kids, with our clients. And so if we can get this information to the providers and they can really start front-ending, proactively working on a lot of these areas, that's where we're going to see the biggest difference for our population and for our clients. So I'm going to walk you through kind of what, as a provider, you need to know about the criminal justice system. I think, and a lot of people are already familiar with this, I think more so on the victim side, individuals with disabilities in general and autistic individuals have a higher propensity to be involved in the criminal justice system. A lot of providers kind of have that already in their front of their mind when it comes to victimization. Okay, I got to teach my client about body awareness, about different things, because I don't want them to fall victim to, a crime that is against them. However, this also applies on the perpetrator side. So there is a propensity on both sides for higher involvement with the criminal justice system. So it's really important that we just be aware of that, that we not ignore that as providers and kind of focus on the here and now, that we're planning long term, especially for our younger individuals, in terms of, okay, what do I teach now? What do I teach when they're younger to help avoid these situations and create that base knowledge that they don't end up in a sticky situation with the criminal justice system? Again, the ARC has a great training on this. I believe this is about a 1-hour webinar that I encourage providers to watch here. It's Criminal Justice 101, kind of give you the lay of the land, big picture overview. And so that's a great resource for you to check out, or if you're in a place where you're training your staff, for them to do as part of their development and training. So as a BCBA, of course, I'm very big on research and using that research to drive your services. And so I wanted to put the information out there for providers in terms of what are the areas, what are the deficits that we're seeing that are leading to this increased propensity so that they can be targeted earlier for our population. So they've been identified through some different research, and different publications that have been put out. And some of these are perceived antisocial behavior, difficulty reading social cues, obstacles with verbal and nonverbal communication. So those of us in the field, this isn't going to be a surprise, but these are kind of the pieces that are important for us to really pull out and to have at the front of our mind as we're working with clients. A study by Hallen in 2004 looked at 4 particular factors that predisposed autistic individuals to being perpetrators of crimes. And these felt social naivety was the first one. And so just really helping our individuals understand early and often social cues, social awareness, understanding what people mean, what they don't mean, inferences. The second category here is aggression triggered by disrupted routine. So again, we know our individuals have trouble with that. So teaching that early and often, how do we learn to cope with a disrupted routine? Balancing, okay, family needs routine to function with, also we need to learn to be okay with things not always going this way. Aggression due to social misunderstanding. So them not understanding, again, on that social side, what something means and reacting aggressively. And then perseverative behaviors in that regard to implication. This can include things like self-stimulation in the sexual sense. This can include being on other people's property. So these are really important things to address early and often. Other factors that were identified in that research were lack of empathy, inability to consistently control emotions, and difficulty with moral reasoning. So you can see how all of those things can really team up to create a perfect storm when it comes to being in a situation that you're not going to be able to read and possibly respond or react before you have an ability to really stop and think about what it is that you're doing or saying. So I've linked an article here that summarizes that research that I told you about so that you can look at it further. But as a provider in the field, these are the questions that I really want you asking yourselves and asking your agencies and the people who work for you and with you is, are you targeting the social skills? Are you teaching and reinforcing receptive communication instruction early and often? Are you conducting real world practice opportunities? This is why for me as a provider, I really, really emphasize that a cookie cutter in-clinic model is not the way to go for our clients. They need to be out generalizing and getting those skills in the community. They need to be at home where they're having issues. They need to be at the grocery store where that routine's going to change. They need to be walking, on the public sidewalk, because their life is not going to happen in the vacuum of just that clinic setting 40 hours a week. So it's very important for providers to really be aware of that and to understand that is your job, that is your responsibility to be conducting those real world practice opportunities and not just stay in that cookie cutter box of just the clinic setting. Are you training the parents, families, and stakeholders? Again, if you're just doing 40 hours a week in clinic and your parents are not involved, that is not going to help with this prong. So it's really important that you're pushing yourself and your team outside of that box and providing those in-person real life training scenarios. Are you practicing disruption and misunderstanding in a safe to fail environment? So again, this is a great place to start in clinic. Let's do it. Let's master it. Okay, we got it. Now let's move out to the sidewalk. Let's move out to the grocery store. Let's move out to the doctor's office where we can generalize and make sure that we really have mastery of this skill. Are you targeting perseverative behaviors that could be perceived by others as a threat? Again, we don't need to target behaviors that are not disruptive or that are not affecting the individual, but we do have to kind of look at things through a lens as, could this be potentially perceived by other people as a threat? Maybe not now when they're 5, but when they're 15. And then with that in mind, are you taking things into account like age, race, and size of your client? we cannot be colorblind here. We cannot not take these factors into account. So as a BCBA, this is something I always looked at with my clients. You know, it's cute now, they're 5 now, they're doing this now. You know, if this is a child who is going to already be perceived as a threat by society, by potentially law enforcement because of their race, what is this behavior going to look like to a law enforcement officer when this child is even 10, right? If they're a bigger child, they're going to look like a threat. And so we really want to be aware of that. We want to look at things through a critical lens and not just put on those colorblind glasses and say, well, I'm just going to treat all my clients the same, all my children the same. We really have to be aware of that's not how other people are going to see them in the community. And we need to be prepared to teach them safety in those situations so that they're not being perceived as a threat or targeted. So it can feel overwhelming as a provider, you know, and you may feel like you're pushing yourself outside of your limits of expertise, but it's really important to remember, like, this is all under the lens of providing socially valid services to our clients, of following the ethics code, of doing what we need to do so that our clients do have the best outcomes and are avoiding the criminal justice system. So I did link here, if you're facing insurance denials for attempting to cover any of these areas that are medically necessary for your client, please visit the Autism Legal Resource Center because they can provide you with more guidance and information on this. And I will plug here, if you're not already attending the Autism Law Summit, that is something I highly encourage you to attend to get more resources in this area. That is, find more information on that website as well. So our next piece, as we talked about, Mark Mahoney does work almost exclusively in this area, is a lot of the crimes that we're talking about that have to do with the autism population are sex offender crimes. And so this is an area that we need to be aware of as providers and familiarize ourselves with. There's a white paper here from the ARC on sex offenders in the criminal justice system. And then they also have a webinar on this topic that specifically focuses on autism and the lack of sex education. And that can be found here. So I highly encourage you to look at that. Sometimes it's, how do we teach this? You know, I was fortunate enough in the clinic that I worked at, a small privately owned, that we had an expert in sex education, you know, that was able to provide these resources, but not everyone has that option. And so it may be, where do I go? How do I teach this? You know, how do I make sure I'm doing it correctly? And so there's a great curriculum. It's called Quality of Life Curriculum by Dr. Michelle Garcia. And that is a nationally recognized curriculum. And it's the premise or the purpose of that curriculum is to keep individuals with disabilities from becoming victims of sexual crimes or engaging in sexual misconduct. So if you're looking for something that fits the bill, you know, that's exactly what this curriculum was designed for. And there's a great article here on the importance of proactively teaching sex education. It was written in part by 2 BCBAs. And I really love this article because it highlights the guidelines of sex education for quote unquote neurotypical children and what that looks like, and then matches that up to, why are we not doing this for our population with IDD, with autism spectrum disorder? Why do we think this isn't important for them? And so I really like the timelines that they use in that article because it really gives us a concrete frame which to follow when we should be teaching our individuals these skills, and just the awareness, both so that they don't become victims, and also so they're not perpetuating crimes against others. All right, and then looking at, you know, one of the ethics codes for BCBAs is just making sure that our documentation is thorough and is proper, you know, but this goes across all different areas of focus, whether you're in a school or a doctor's office, or you're in a, you know, rehabilitation center or at a group home. Keeping your documentation detailed, you know, making sure that it has the information in there so that it does, if it does need to be used in the legal system, everything that you need is organized, detailed, objective, and timely, because that's what an attorney is going to be looking for. When that parent puts that packet together and gives it to the attorney, the more detail and specificity and consistency you have with your documentation, the easier it's going to be for them to piece that timeline together, their picture together, and then follow the appropriate path to best represent that client to get the best outcomes. So some of the key areas here are looking at pervasive deficits and then long-term goals. So, if you have a goal that you've been trying to work on with this client since he was 5 and he's 15, and you have tried 25 different interventions and have not been able to master that goal, that's really important for someone to know. If that's related at all to the crime that they're being accused of, that's going to be imperative for that attorney to know, hey, we've been trying to address this. They're not responsive to treatment in this area. Again, pointing out the individual's core deficits relating to the symptomology of autism. That's going to be extremely important for an attorney to have that information so that they can best paint the picture and represent their client effectively. So again, my soapbox here really on how you can help and impact change is to educate. So just you being here, you listening to this webinar is, a fantastic first step, and I appreciate you listening and being here. But really getting yourself that knowledge and feeling like you can help the population by educating others you work with, right? Whether that be the parents of the individuals you're serving, other staff, other people in the community, really getting the word out so that people have this information and they can better prepare individuals for how to respond and how to interact. So starts small, and then that can have a ripple effect. There's some really great resources here. There's a cheat sheet here for first responders that I really like from Autism Speaks that you can use if you want to kind of quickly disseminate bite-sized pieces of information. And then the ARC has their National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability, the Pathways to Justice branch. There's an introductory video here, and part of this program they do is they want you to create a local disability response team to identify barriers in the community. And then what they do once they have a representative in the areas, they provide a full day in-person training for key stakeholders. This could be law enforcement related service providers, and they provide some key information on how to best educate and service the community. So if you want to help bring that program to your community, here's the link. And then of course, there's always legislative opportunities. So this report here is the International Society of Autism Research. So this is kind of a big picture view on policy opportunities and challenges. This is worldwide. And so this gives you kind of an overview of different areas that different countries have been working on related to changing legislation for autism in the criminal justice system. So if you want to get a big picture overview. And then there's different organizations in your state potentially that are working on this area. One of these is a legal reform for the intellectually and developmentally disabled. And they're based in Virginia. So I know they've worked with the Autism Legal Resource Center, and they provide tracking on different legislative bills and also advocacy on those bills that have to do with individuals with autism dealing with the criminal justice system. You can find current legislation in your area by searching the Bill Track 50 website. So there's a free citizen account here that you can register for, and then you can go on there and check, are there any bills being proposed in my state right now that affect criminal justice and autism? Are there any areas that I should be aware of? And then that way you're really in the know and you can involve yourself with the areas that you're passionate about. You can say, I'm going to go provide in-person or written testimony. I'm going to call my representative. I'm going to mobilize my support system to make sure that my voice is heard. So these are all opportunities that you can use to get involved. So that is the last page that we had for the criminal resources. I just want to say, I want to open it up if anyone has any questions or comments at this point.
I just want to say thank you for these resources. Our agency has been working on identifying our own policies and procedures to support clients in being charged appropriately based on their disability, but also based on, maladaptive behaviors that occur out in the community and whatnot. And this has been a fabulous bank of resources that I'm excited to take back to my team. So thank you for all of this.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being here. All right, so if there's no other questions there, I'll end here. I do appreciate those of you who attended in person, and then anyone who's watching this recording, just for taking the time to educate yourself and to try to help this population. So thank you so much.
Thank you again, Monica. Really appreciate all your hard work.